You think you're in control, don't you? You think that by checking their phone, by analyzing every text message, by trying to predict their next move, you're somehow protecting yourself. But here's the brutal truth that will shatter your comfortable delusion. You are nothing more than a piece of driftwood being tossed around in an ocean of your own desperate need for certainty. Every time you reach for that phone to check if they've replied, every time you scan their face for signs of approval, every time you twist yourself into whatever shape you think they want, you're not finding safety. You're drowning. You're drowning in the illusion that external validation can fill the gaping void inside you that only you can heal. The conscious acknowledgement that you cannot control other people should terrify you, not because it's dangerous, but because it strips away the last lie you tell yourself about why you're unhappy. You cannot control what partner you meet. You cannot control what they do. You cannot control their feelings, their thoughts, their actions, or their choices. And every moment you spend trying is a moment you spend betraying the only person you actually have power over, yourself. But you keep doing it, don't you? You keep checking, controlling, obsessing, because the alternative, facing the raw reality of your own incompleteness, feels like death itself. You'd rather live in the chaos of trying to control the uncontrollable than face the silence of your own mind. You'd rather be a slave to someone else's approval than the master of your own soul. Here's what you refuse to see. You cannot find safety in trying to control another human being. You will not find the stability you crave in their responses, their presence, or their promises. That groundedness you're desperately searching for, it doesn't exist in them. It exists in you, buried beneath layers of anxious attachment, childhood wounds, and the terrifying belief that you are not enough on your own. You need to create a temple in your own reality, an unshakable foundation that stands still while everything else around you moves. But instead, you've made yourself a weather vane, spinning frantically with every shift in someone else's emotional climate. You've made your worth dependent on variables you cannot control, and then you wonder why you feel so powerless. Stop lying to yourself. Stop pretending that your obsession with control is love. It's not love, it's fear wearing a mask. It's the desperate clawing of someone who has never learned to stand alone, who has never discovered that they are already whole. You think your attachment is love, but it's actually a missile, and you've aimed it directly at your own soul. When you hone in like a heat-seeking weapon on making someone love you, on making a relationship work despite every red flag waving in your face, you're not demonstrating devotion. You're demonstrating the most devastating form of self-betrayal imaginable. Women especially fall into this trap. You want to fix things to make them work, to attach yourselves to ideas and concepts, and people with a death grip that would make a drowning person jealous. You'll find a man who's not that into you. Maybe he gives you just enough attention to keep you hooked, but not enough to actually invest his life in you, and you'll decide that's your person. Do or die, that's what you choose. But here's the truth you refuse to face. When you attach yourself to someone who's giving you breadcrumbs, you're not fighting for love. You're fighting for the right to remain unconscious. You're fighting for the right to avoid the terrifying question of what would happen if you actually demanded what you deserved. Sometimes the universe has to slap you in the face to wake you up. Sometimes it takes betrayal, cheating, or complete abandonment to break through your attachment-induced blindness. And when that happens, when your carefully constructed fantasy finally crumbles, you have two choices. You can stay bitter, resentful, and convinced that love is a lie. Or you can wake up and realize that what you thought was love was actually a prison you built for yourself. People like you, people with anxious attachment, you'll stay and work through anything. You'll endure disrespect, neglect, and outright abuse because you're almost blind to the fact that you're here to live one life, and the quality of that life needs to be extraordinary. You don't exist to struggle up the hill of life carrying someone on your back who contributes nothing to your journey. Why were you born to be someone's pack mule? Why were you born to carry the emotional weight of someone who can't be bothered to carry their own? You think this is love, but it's actually a form of spiritual suicide, the slow death of your own worth, your own dreams, your own potential. The harsh reality is this. The person you're desperately trying to hold on to probably isn't even aware of the emotional Olympics you're performing for their attention. While you're breaking yourself into pieces trying to be what they want, they're living their life completely unconscious of your internal struggle. You're fighting a war that only exists in your mind, against an enemy who doesn't even know they're supposedly fighting you. Let's talk about the most pathetic ritual in modern relationships: going through their phone. You think you're being smart, investigative, protective of your investment. But what you're actually doing is orchestrating the death of any authentic connection you might have had. You're not finding truth, you're creating the very betrayal you fear. Here's the brutal psychology behind your phone-checking compulsion. You're so terrified of being blindsided that you'll destroy your relationship with your own hands rather than risk being surprised by someone else's. You'd rather be the architect of your own heartbreak than trust another human being. You'd rather live in the certainty of surveillance than the uncertainty of love. But here's what you don't understand about the human psyche. If you want to find something, you will. Not because everyone is cheating, not because everyone is a liar, but because your mindset is predicated on that person being the be-all and end, all of your existence. When someone holds that much power over your emotional state, you will find evidence of their wrongdoing even where none exists. You'll find a text from 3 years ago, and suddenly it becomes today's crisis. You'll find a conversation with a coworker and turn it into evidence of an affair. You'll find a liked photo and transform it into proof of emotional infidelity. Not because you're psychic, but because you're looking at everything through the lens of someone who has made another person responsible for their entire emotional well-being. The sick irony is that by checking their phone, you're cornering them into the very behavior you fear. You're thinking badly of them, suspecting them, treating them like a criminal, and then you wonder why they start acting defensive, secretive, or distant. You're literally training them to hide things from you, not because they're guilty of anything, but because living under surveillance is psychologically unbearable for any human being. The way to make a person do good by you is to already speak into them as if they are good. But you've chosen the opposite path. You've chosen to live in a state of constant suspicion, turning your relationship into a court trial where they're always the defendant and you're the prosecutor, judge, and jury. What you're really afraid of isn't infidelity, it's your own powerlessness. You're terrified that if they leave, you'll crumble. You're terrified that without them, you're nothing. So you try to control the uncontrollable, monitor the unmonitorable, and guarantee the ungrantable. But all you're guaranteeing is the destruction of anything real that might have existed between you. Stop lying to yourself about what you're doing. You're not protecting your relationship, you're suffocating it. You're not finding security, you're creating chaos. You're not preventing betrayal, you're ensuring it. You've become a mirror, a blank, reflective surface that shows people exactly what they want to see. And you think this makes you lovable, desirable, irreplaceable. But here's the devastating truth. Mirrors are functional, not fascinating. They're useful, not unforgettable. They're convenient, not compelling. When someone tells you their favorite color is red, you don't rush to declare that red is suddenly your favorite too. But that's exactly what you do with everything else. Their opinions become your opinions. Their interests become your interests. Their reality becomes the only reality you're allowed to inhabit. You've made yourself into an echo, and then you wonder why your voice doesn't matter. This isn't love, this is erasure. This isn't connection, this is disappearance. You've confused being adaptable with being invisible, being accommodating with being replaceable. And the cruelest irony is that the very thing you think will make them love you is the exact thing that makes you forgettable. In psychology, one of the fundamental rules of attraction is that a person must be deeply themselves. But you've chosen the opposite path. You've chosen to become a psychological chameleon, changing colors so rapidly that nobody can remember what your original shade was. You've become so busy being what you think they want that you've forgotten who you actually are. When they say they love chocolate cake, you shouldn't run to become a chocolate cake. You should stand proud as the cheesecake you are and serve them the most incredible slice they've ever tasted. But how can you offer your unique flavor when you don't even know what it is? How can you bring blueberries to the table when you've convinced yourself that only chocolate matters? You think you're being accommodating, but you're actually being cowardly. You think you're being flexible, but you're actually being spineless. You think you're being loving, but you're actually being terrified that who you really are isn't enough, that your authentic self is somehow defective, that your natural preferences are wrong. But here's what you don't understand. When you disappear into someone else's reality, you don't become more lovable, you become more replaceable. Because most human beings on this earth are attached to people and outcomes. Most people are willing to contort themselves for approval. You're not special for being a mirror, you're ordinary. The way to become irresistible and irreplaceable is to detach from their approval and attach to your own identity. It's to say, this is me, this is my world, this is my space, and I'm okay whether you approve or not. It's to stop performing in the circus of their expectations and start being the main character in your own life story. You've spent so long being afraid of being rejected for who you are that you've never given anyone the chance to love who you actually are. You've been too busy being their idea of perfect to discover whether you could be perfect just as yourself. Your anxiety isn't random. Your desperate need for other people's approval isn't a personality quirk. Your inability to sit with uncertainty isn't a cute character flaw. It's the direct result of a factory that was built in your childhood, an anxiety production facility that's been running 24/7 ever since, manufacturing fear and insecurity with ruthless efficiency. Somewhere in your early years, something happened that taught you a lie that became your religion, that love is conditional, safety is temporary, and you are fundamentally unworthy unless you perform. Maybe your father was absent, physically present but emotionally unavailable. Maybe your mother was inconsistent, there one day and gone the next. Maybe you learned that attention was scarce and you had to compete for scraps of affection. Whatever the specific trauma, the message was clear. You cannot trust others to love you unless you give them a reason. You cannot rely on your inherent worth because inherent worth doesn't exist. Only earned worth, performed worth, proven worth. And so you built your entire identity around being useful, pleasant, agreeable, and non-threatening. But here's the brutal truth about that survival strategy. It worked when you were a child, but it's killing you as an adult. The very mechanisms that helped you survive your childhood are now preventing you from living your adulthood. You're still that child, desperately trying to earn love from people who can't give you what your parents couldn't provide. You're searching for stability and groundedness in other people because you never learned to create it within yourself. You're looking for someone to be the parent who tells you you're worthy, you're enough, you matter. But no romantic partner can heal the wound that was created before you even understood what love was supposed to look like. The anxiety you feel when someone doesn't text back isn't about them. It's about the terror of abandonment that was programmed into you before you could speak. The desperation you feel when someone seems distant isn't about your relationship. It's about the childhood fear that love is always one mistake away from disappearing. And so you become hypervigilant, always scanning for signs of rejection, always ready to fix, please, and perform. You turn every relationship into a job interview where you're constantly proving your worth, demonstrating your value, earning your place. But here's what your wounded child doesn't understand. Love that has to be earned isn't love, it's employment. You cannot heal childhood wounds by finding someone who will finally give you the approval you needed 30 years ago. You cannot fix the absent father by finding a man who never leaves. You cannot heal the inconsistent mother by becoming so perfectly agreeable that no one could ever find you difficult. The only way to heal is to become the parent to yourself that you never had. To create that inner sanctuary of worth that doesn't depend on external validation. To build an internal foundation so strong that other people's opinions become interesting but irrelevant to your core sense of self. You've made outcomes your god, and like all false gods, this one demands everything and gives nothing in return. You worship at the altar of when this happens, then I'll be happy. When he proposes, when she says yes, when the relationship becomes official, when you move in together, when you get married, always when, never now. Always tomorrow, never today. But here's the devastating truth about destination addiction. There is no destination. There is no finish line where you finally get to stop running and start living. There is no relationship status that will magically transform you into someone who feels whole, complete, and worthy. The person you are when you reach your goal is exactly the person you are right now, just with different circumstances. You think the problem is that you don't have what you want, but the real problem is that you've made wanting the purpose of your existence. You've turned your life into a waiting room where you sit, anxious and incomplete, until your number is called. But what if your number never gets called? What if the thing you're waiting for never comes? Have you just wasted your entire existence in the lobby of maybe? This is why detachment is the most radical act of self-love you can commit. Detachment means stepping off the hamster wheel of constant striving and into the shocking realization that your life is happening right now. Not when you get the relationship, not when you achieve the goal, not when you finally feel safe. Right now, in this moment, while you're reading these words. The journey isn't a means to an end, the journey is the end. The process isn't preparation for living, the process is living. But you've been so busy trying to control the outcome that you've missed the only thing you actually have. This moment, this breath, this choice to be present in your own life. When you focus on outcomes, you turn every day into a measurement of how close you are to what you want instead of how alive you are to what you have. You turn every interaction into a transaction, every conversation into an audition, every moment into evidence of whether you're succeeding or failing at achieving your desired future. But outcomes are not in your control. Other people's choices are not in your control. Timing is not in your control. The economy, the weather, global pandemics, your boss's mood, your partner's feelings, none of it is in your control. The only thing you can control is how you show up in this moment, how you treat yourself in this moment, how you choose to see your life in this moment. Detachment from outcomes doesn't mean you stop having goals or desires. It means you stop making your happiness hostage to their achievement. It means you start finding fulfillment in the pursuit rather than demanding satisfaction from the prize. It means you stop postponing your life until conditions are perfect and start living it while conditions are simply what they are. The most terrifying moment in your life will be the first time you sit completely alone with yourself. No distractions, no phone, no people, no noise, just you and the raw reality of your own existence. And most people will do anything, absolutely anything, to avoid this moment. They'll stay in terrible relationships, accept mediocre treatment, and sacrifice their authentic selves rather than face the supposed horror of being alone. But here's the secret that will change your life. Learning to be alone isn't punishment, it's liberation. It's not isolation, it's integration. It's not loneliness, it's wholeness. The ability to be alone, truly alone, without anxiety or desperation, is the foundation of every healthy relationship you'll ever have. When you can sit with yourself in silence and feel complete, you become unhookable. Nobody can manipulate you with the threat of abandonment because abandonment is no longer your greatest fear. Nobody can control you with the promise of companionship because you've already found the most important companionship of all, the relationship with yourself. But most people are absolutely terrified of their own company. They've spent so many years avoiding themselves, distracting themselves, numbing themselves, that they don't even know who they are anymore. They're strangers to their own thoughts, foreign to their own dreams, afraid of their own potential. And so they project this fear outward, making other people responsible for filling the void they refuse to explore. Sacred solitude is different from loneliness. Loneliness is the pain of being disconnected from others. Solitude is the joy of being connected to yourself. Loneliness is external, it's about missing someone. Solitude is internal, it's about finding someone, you. When you master the art of being alone, something magical happens in your energy. You stop radiating need and start radiating completeness. You stop looking for someone to complete you and start looking for someone to complement you. You stop seeking rescue and start offering partnership. You stop being half a person looking for another half and become a whole person willing to create something beautiful with another whole person. This is why every spiritual tradition emphasizes some form of solitude, meditation, or retreat. Not because they want you to become antisocial hermits, but because they understand that you cannot love others authentically until you've learned to love yourself completely. You cannot give what you don't have. You cannot offer wholeness from a place of fragmentation. The person who has learned to be alone has learned the most important lesson of all, that your happiness, your peace, your sense of worth cannot be dependent on external circumstances. You become like a tree with deep roots. No storm can knock you over because your stability comes from within, not from leaning on other trees. But this requires courage. It requires the willingness to face whatever you've been running from. It requires sitting with your fears, your insecurities, your shame, and discovering that they can't actually hurt you. It requires meeting yourself as you truly are, not as you perform to be, not as others expect you to be, but as you authentically are. There's a death that must happen before you can truly live, and most people spend their entire existence avoiding it. It's not the death of your body, it's the death of your desperate self. The death of the person who needs others to feel worthy. The death of the identity built on external validation. The death of the false self that has convinced you that you are incomplete without someone else's approval. This death feels absolutely terrifying because you've mistaken this desperate self for who you actually are. You think that without the need, the seeking, the performing, the trying to be chosen, you'll cease to exist. But what actually happens is the opposite. When the desperate self dies, your authentic self is finally free to be born. The false self is a masterful actor. It has convinced you that its constant anxiety is vigilance, that its desperate seeking is love, that its performance is authenticity. It has made you believe that without it, you'll be abandoned, unloved, forgotten. But this false self is actually what's preventing you from experiencing real love, real connection, real intimacy. True detachment is the willingness to let this false self die. It's the courage to stop being who you think you need to be and start being who you actually are. It's the radical act of choosing authenticity over approval, wholeness over acceptance, truth over performance. But here's what nobody tells you about this death. It's not violent or tragic. It's actually the most peaceful thing you'll ever experience. Like taking off clothes that never fit properly, like removing a mask you never wanted to wear, like stepping out of a role you were never meant to play. The relief is indescribable. When the desperate self dies, what remains is pure presence. Not the presence that tries to impress or please or perform, but the presence that simply is. The presence that doesn't need to be anything other than what it already is. The presence that doesn't require external validation because it validates itself through existence alone. This is when you become truly dangerous to a world built on neediness and desperation. You become someone who cannot be manipulated through fear of abandonment because you're no longer afraid of being alone. You become someone who cannot be controlled through promises of love because you've already found the love that matters most, the love you have for yourself. People will try to resurrect your desperate self. They'll try to make you need them again because your neediness made them feel important. They'll try to make you insecure again because your desperation gave them power. They'll try to convince you that your wholeness is arrogance, that your boundaries are coldness, that your self-love is selfishness. But once you've experienced the freedom of existing without the constant anxiety of needing to be chosen, you can never go back. Once you've tasted the peace of being complete within yourself, external validation becomes interesting but irrelevant. Once you've felt the power of choosing yourself, waiting to be chosen becomes impossible. This is the ultimate detachment, not from people or love or connection, but from the false self that believed you needed to earn these things. When you detach from the lie that you are incomplete, you become truly free to love, to connect, to experience intimacy from a place of abundance rather than scarcity.